Hello, everybody, and welcome to Cinema Savvy. It's myself, George, joined once more by Tayte, and finally bringing Charlie to the Steven Spielberg Retrospective. We are here today to review his second film of 1997. This is, of course, Amistad, directed by Steven Spielberg, and we have a lot to discuss with this one tonight. But before we get into any of that, how are we all doing today?
Yeah, doing good. This was one on the retrospective that I had written down as a not seen before going into it. And it had intrigued me. I didn't really know much about it going into it. All I knew was that the film was about slavery and the slave trade. I didn't know anything about the story behind it or anything like that. So it's one that it really intrigued me going into it, especially because it was nominated for a few Oscars. So I thought, okay, it's obviously got good enough grounding to be kind of nominated for the Oscars. It got swamped in the Oscar year. We'll talk about it by a lot of other films that were released that year. It was quite a heavy year for that. But it was one that was kind of listed. So I was really interested, kind of looking forward to it.
Yeah, that's kind of the same for me. I really didn't know anything about it, which is why I wanted to be on this video, because it gave me a chance, like an excuse to actually sit down and finally watch it. I mean, it's a long film, so it's like finding the time and the energy to watch something as heavy as this as well. Like, it gave me a really good reason to actually go, no, come on, like put your phone away and just really focus on it. And I'm glad I did, because I loved it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, this, because I mean, we'll get to it shortly, that it's all the first time we've seen this film. It's not the first time it's happened on the series, which makes it quite an interesting dynamic. And same as you say, I did not know much before I saw this film. I didn't know this film existed until January when I was doing thumbnails. I was like, he did a film like between Jurassic Park and Private Ryan. We'll get to that. But before we get into all of that sort of stuff, I want to hear from everybody at home. So please do comment your thoughts on Amistad. As we said, this is part of the Steven Spielberg Retrospective. We're just past the halfway point now, which is insane to think we're only just past halfway. So if you're a fan of Steven Spielberg, this is the place to be. Hit that subscribe button. There's a lot of stuff happening on the channel. And again, let us know your thoughts on this film, your memories with it. If you've seen it, you can stream this both on Netflix and on Paramount Plus in the United Kingdom. Thanks to both of you two telling me. Meanwhile, I just spent like £15 on the Blu-ray because I hadn't done my research. But
yeah,
it doesn't matter because it's in the collection. But Tayte, where can people find us for upcoming videos and other videos that might pop up out of nowhere?
Yes, so we have loads coming up with the Spielberg Retrospective and other videos coming out. So go follow us on Twitter and Instagram at cinema_savvy. Go follow us on Facebook and letterboxd.com. Just type in Cinema Savvy. And if you go into the link in the description, we do have a merchandise store as well. So go and support us there.
Definitely. And Charlie, it's the first time we've got you on for the Spielberg series. Very overdue, I'm going to say. I know we were meant to go on E.T., but you weren't well, and a few other films. But we finally got you on. And what we're putting everybody on the spot with when they join us for their first episode, we kind of want to know, can you remember maybe the first Spielberg film you saw or your memories attached to his films?
I have no idea what the first one was that I watched. I've basically, like most people, been watching his films my entire life, so I couldn't pinpoint one. One that I did love watching, I don't think he directed it, but I know it was his company that produced it, was The Land Before Time. I watched that a lot growing up. I love that film. Great animated dinosaur film. But he's, like anyone who loves film, he's one of my favorite directors. I mean, it's impossible to find any Spielberg films that you don't like, you know, like, okay, there'll be some that aren't people's favorites, but every time he has a film coming out, you know, you're going to catch it at the cinema. You know, it's going to be like an event film. It's going to be good fun. It's going to be worth seeing. So I love the guy. I think he's an absolute legend.
No, that's amazing. And again, it's always nice to get different stories, different ones. Land Before Time, I think it's the first time I've had that on. We've had so many different films.
Yeah.
I don't think people would quite believe it, which kind of adds to it. Because as you said, everybody's grown up with this one, so whether they know who he is or they don't, it makes it really exciting getting people on to ask that sort of question. And as we do this series, we'll begin with the IMDb Plus synopsis, and I always laugh because it's either a paragraph or it's a line. We have a horrifically long one this time, but it's kind of understandable. So I don't read these in advance. I copy and paste it on the schedule and I read it on the video. So this is new to me and everybody else. So here we are. In 1839, the revolt of the Mendi captives aboard a Spanish-owned ship causes a major controversy in the United States when the ship is captured off the coast of Long Island. The courts must decide whether the Mendi are slaves or legally free. Says everything you need to know about this film, because it's going to be quite a subject matter. So I'm not going to sort of poke fun at it in that regards. It's a very long synopsis, though. You could have ended it about halfway through. But just sort of going off into the film. Sorry, Tate, you mentioned at the start that you hadn't seen this one. We've all seen this for the first time before this video. How was it, I would guess, as a first viewing, or did you know much about it before you saw it this week?
Knew pretty much next to nothing. Hadn't seen a trailer. Pretty much, I hadn't even seen the poster, really. It was quite interesting because when I searched up, I was like, oh, I'll just quickly look on the streaming website, see whether it's on any, and it kind of popped up on Netflix. I was like, oh, okay. And at that point, that was the first time I saw the cast list, and I was like, oh, okay. So we've got Morgan Freeman, we got Sir Anthony Hopkins, we've got Matthew McConaughey, we've got Stellan Skarsgård, we've got Nigel Hawthorne. There's so many in there. You could just, honestly, the list is so long. Like Chiwetel Ejiofor's first film, I will try and pronounce it as we've been practicing beforehand. Djimon Hounsou as well, who, like most people would know from Guardians of the Galaxy. It's a lot of like acting talent in there. And I was reading through the list, and I was like, wow, this film is stacked. Like so many different actors in there and stuff like that. As far as the first viewing was concerned, I really enjoyed it. Not for the subject matter itself, but just the presentation of the film. It's quite a difficult watch in some points. In other points, it's just kind of more angling towards a courtroom drama. But the content of the film, I found at least quite thrilling and quite interesting. And the way the situation was handled. I guess it's because I'm always interested in different parts of history and how directors and filmmakers are able to handle those different parts of history. I know that you've been discussing on one of the previous ones on this Schindler's List, and how difficult that was to kind of put into filmmaking and how that subject matter was handled. And I think this subject matter was handled quite well as well, and given the respect it deserved. And it made the story, at least from kind of my perspective, a lot more understandable. And kind of having that medium of film allowed me to understand the history of it and kind of see it through different eyes, which was really good.
Yeah, I think like we've kind of all said, none of us knew a huge amount about it when it before watching it. I knew the cast because I'm a huge Matthew McConaughey fan, so it's been in my watch list for a long time to try and see all of his films. And what a role for him as well in the 90s. Like people always say that he was so focused on rom-coms and comedies until he did, I think it was like Dallas Buyers Club or Interstellar, one of those. But really, I mean, this was his big turning point role, I would say, for his career and his filmography. But yeah, I think it's one of those films that I think if someone said, oh, it's a 2.5-hour historical epic about the slave trade, I'd have been a bit like, I'm not sure I can handle it. But I'm quite glad that I didn't know that much about it going in, because as it was unfolding, I was like, this is a story that really did need to be told. And I think it's interesting because we do know quite a lot about that period of time from film. You know, we know a lot about the Civil War, we know a lot about the founding fathers and all of that kind of stuff, but this kind of takes something that is essentially a little bit more specific, a little bit more time restricted into a specific time, and really opens it up and tells a story about people who story isn't necessarily always told, if that makes sense. I do find it very interesting to think about how these kind of films from the 90s particularly would be if they were made now. And I think there is a lot of things that would be very different, particularly the poster. Like, I think the poster is really interesting because it has all great big names on it, but the two main characters on the poster are Anthony Hopkins and Matthew McConaughey, and I'm like, it's not their story. It's not their story that they're telling at all. But I mean, it was the 90s, things were very different then, and audiences were drawn to very different stories then as well. So I think that in itself is very interesting, the marketing of it.
Yeah, it's really well said about that being modern day, because I think this would be a TV series if this was today.
Oh, yeah.
We'll bring up that HBO was originally involved in this, which explains some of my issues, but I will get into that. But in terms of my first viewing, it was a very weird one today, because before we went live, I spoke to Tate, and I just said that, not that I didn't, I mean, you can't really enjoy a film with this context, if that makes sense, but it didn't hit me like a lot of his other dramas, because obviously covering this since March, we've seen the height of the blockbuster era and his move into dramas. Obviously, we had Schindler's List a few weeks ago. And to him to come back to another drama was really interesting, because I knew nothing about this except it was about slavery. We've got the main actor, Djimon Hounsou. I'm so sorry my pronunciation. I've been terrified to say it all day. And I should know, because he's in Gladiator, one of my favorite films, and so many other great films. And kind of what you said, Charlie, that the post is very different. And if I'm going to be really honest, and this is nothing to the film, my least, and it's not even a genre of film, but there's nothing more off-putting to me than watching like 1800s American dramas. It's kind of the same with British ones. That time of history is never. I've always enjoyed modern history because I studied it so much when I was younger. So the sort of like the 20th century to me was always a mega one, and the 19th century stuff I've just always like been sort of not cared about, but I've always been sort of switched off. But as you said, it was modern, be very different, and because this feels so 90s, that's kind of not my issue with it, because that's really unfair. But something just didn't hit me about this film, and we'll get into it as we discuss it, because I'm hoping I can change my sort of thoughts on it. But I just hated the entire courtroom angle to it.
Wow.
I'm not saying I love the other stuff, but I thought the really interesting stuff was the character journeys of the slaves, of where the politicians are, not necessarily in the court side of it. And I think it's a really unfair comparison because it's so many years newer. In theory, it's very similar to 12 Years a Slave. And that's one of my, not favorite, again, you can't call it a favorite Oscar film, but that's one of the more powerful Oscar films that stuck in my mind for a very long time. Also has Chiwetel Ejiofor in as well, which is a connection.
Yeah, I was going to say, is Matthew McConaughey in that one as well? If I remember, if I got that wrong.
No, I don't think so.
May have got that wrong.
Double check.
Brad Pitt.
I don't know why, but in my head, he sticks out as being in that film, and I don't know why.
I mean, he really should be. If he's not, he should have been in that film, let's be honest.
No, I don't think he was. No, he wasn't. That is my mistake. Apologies.
No, it's fine. But yeah, for a first viewing state, I didn't really know what to expect, and it was quite long as well, which I don't mind. We've done so many of these films now, and we're sort of clocking in regularly now at 2.5 hours, which I don't mind, especially when it's if you notice one thing with Spielberg, which we'll say, is that his dramas, again, are 215 plus now, and his blockbuster sort of sit just under the sort of 205 meter, which is really interesting with his runtimes. But again, Steven Spielberg in the 90s, nobody's going to tell him how long his films are going to be. And it's worth adding that this is DreamWorks' first film of his. He set up DreamWorks. It was their third film as a studio. The second one was Mouse Hunt, which was the same year, which I remember now because I've got that on video still. But yeah, that's a big moment for his career and what DreamWorks went on to become as a studio. But if we're heading into some behind the scenes stuff, so I'm going to say this as well. This is the hardest schedule I've had to make in terms of researching for some of the important stuff, because there's not much out there into the making of this film. And I was actually quite not gutted, but it was sort of, there wasn't like any source materials, any books they've been basing it off. It was all sort of trying to find out stuff, and it was all he said, she said in regards to this film. And it all stems with the producer, Debbie Allen, she spent 14 years trying to get this film into production. And, you hear stories over the years of producers that have spent so many years of their life's work trying to get projects greenlit. And for this one, sort of especially, it was very weird for me, like 14 years for this. And I don't want to call it an Oscar bait film because it's not that at all. And I'll get into some of the more personal stuff from Spielberg for this. But I was very surprised it took not just 14 years for this to be made. It clearly had to take Steven Spielberg saying yes for this film to be made. I don't know if anybody had heard of that or knew anything in regards to that, but is that quite surprising?
The fact that it took 14 years in development for a film like this doesn't really surprise me, because it is, first of all, quite a heavy subject to go into and quite a difficult subject to put into film. But because there's no direct account of the events that happened, it is all stuff coming from various different places. If someone did want to go in and say, yes, I want to make a film about the Amistad situation, then you have so much to comb through to get it right, or just even the basics correct and stuff like that. Hearing that it was originally developed for HBO, and I after kind of you mentioned that, because I didn't know that going into this review, it does make me think that this probably would have done better as a TV series. Just knowing how good HBO are at kind of turning historical events into TV series and stuff like that, thinking Band of Brothers was not too far down the line from this film.
Yeah.
So the fact that they could have done something along those lines to kind of portray the events would have been really, really interesting. It doesn't detract from the fact that the film is very well done and it's kind of kept to that. But it is very interesting that kind of that's how the film was developed.
Yeah, I mean, 14 years is a long time to get a film of this caliber off the ground, I think, personally. I mean, it's a historical epic, and although that's not for everyone, there definitely is a big audience out there for films like this, especially films about that period of time in the US. You know, just look at, I know it's a long time before, but look at Gone with the Wind. It's still one of the biggest films of all time, and it's very close in timeline to Amistad. So you would think that they would kind of be able to get it in motion because of what the film is and what it's about. Maybe it's because it doesn't show the US in the best light. Maybe times were very different in the 90s. There was a lot of concern about reputation and about who is brave enough to take on a film that shows the Supreme Court making a bad decision. And, you know, I mean, ultimately they made the right decision, obviously, but, you know, and there's a lot of debate between Spain and the United Kingdom and the US and Cuba, and it brings in a lot of politics, and maybe they just didn't think that there was an audience for that. But I think it's really surprising that it isn't more well known. I think if it wasn't sandwiched in between, was it released in between
Lost World,
Schindler's List,
Lost World and Private Ryan?
Right. I mean, they're two of his biggest films, you know, so maybe that's part of the reason why it's kind of fallen behind and people aren't aware of it. But I am surprised. To me, this, especially with that cast, it really should have been one of his greats, but it baffles me why it's not.
Yeah, it's a really good point of that. And what I kind of want to add, because we mentioned this a few times already today, he didn't actually sign on to the film, Spielberg, until the script presented to him by Debbie Allen was rewritten by Steven Zalian, who did the adaptation for him for Schindler's List, which kind of makes me think that the fact that, again, he's trusted somebody that did something so personal to him with one of his previous films, and to not sign on until he has seen this done properly. I mean, Tayte, you were on The Colour Purple with me and Elliot when we did that. He was very concerned about originally joining that project, and that was his first outright drama, I would say.
Yeah.
And it kind of feels the same way now, and I guess it's this, to me, the sign of respect for Spielberg, where, you know, he knows for a film like this, he isn't directly personally attached. No, he isn't a descendant of slaves, without stating the obvious. And we've just had Schindler's List, which is a very, very personal film to him. And he even said, you know, he didn't want to do Colour Purple because he thought it should be a black director. And when we spoke that there's going to be, I think next year, the remake's due out the musical, that obviously is going to have a black director, which is a really interesting sort of where we are, you know, if this film was made today conversation. And I thought it's quite admirable of him, because I'm going to make another comparison to Colour Purple. It doesn't feel like a Spielberg film, but that's a compliment. That it's him telling the story of Amistad and the slaves. It's not his sort of wow touch on it. And I loved Empire of Sun for being different in that respect, and it works better in that respect. But for this and Colour Purple, Schindler's List, probably his more, up to this point in time, his more, you know, the real life adaptations. I think that's quite a powerful story tool, would you say? Because also it's worth noticing, this was only filmed over 31 days, which is a short amount of time. And I'm going to add this, Charlie, you'll be more surprised this. Matthew McConaughey was on set filming for 28 out of the 31 days.
Oh, that is interesting.
I would say that a lot of the kind of, when we go into the characters and everything like that, McConaughey does take over a lot of the courtroom time. And I don't know whether to class him as the main character. It's very difficult to class who is the main character of this film, because I'd say the film shifts focus a few times throughout. You have, of course, kind of the opening with the slaves breaking free from the Amistad, and then you have them being captured and taken in by the US. that's where the focus then shifts onto kind of the courtroom stuff, which for the main focus of the film, it is McConaughey trying to get a trial together, trying to get the right people in, trying to get the right evidence in to kind of exonerate them. And then I'd say kind of midway through the film, that then kind of comes in with Chiwetel Ejiofor's character becoming the translator. You have Djimon Hounsou, who gives the kind of the recollection of what actually happened. You're finally able to understand it, and that's where the focus shifts again. So that's quite interesting that McConaughey was on set for that amount of time, because it just shows that the other 3 days that would have been filming would have been all the stuff to do with the ship, everything to do with the ship for those others, which is absolutely crazy because there was so much going on with that. And also, I guess the slave fortress as well, that must have been included into that time, which is big crowd scenes. It's crazy that they were able to do that in that amount of time. But going back to your previous point about Spielberg dealing with historical events, and I'd say putting just, respect towards them. The fact that he brought in his screenwriter, or he was brought in by his screenwriter from Schindler's List, and also the fact that at this stage he has done a few now adaptations of events which aren't directly personal to him, but it is kind of history of other people and kind of other situations, and he's put respect to that. I think that would make him a little bit more kind of confident that he was able to give a film like this the treatment that it absolutely deserved, and kind of the respect that it deserved as a film. Especially when, not only has the films been successful, but they have also made people very aware of those situations, and been a brilliant platform for demonstrating and displaying kind of the horrors that have happened to these people, and trying to make people understand that kind of, what happened, so that people can learn from that. So when it gets to this film, the fact that he's able to kind of come onto it and once again do exactly the same that he's done with the previous films, it just shows what a fantastic filmmaker he is, that he's able to do this not only once or twice, but continuously, and continue to give the films what they really deserve.
Yeah, and I think kind of talking about the fact that he takes on these mega projects and tells these stories that do need to be told. He doesn't sugarcoat anything, and I think that's really important, because I would imagine any film that featured the slave trade or slaves in the US before then probably pictured them as the friendly housemaid, raises the kids, that motherly presence in the house. But he was like, no, people need to see the reality of this situation. And that opening sequence, I was literally I've got 2.5 hours of this. This is going to be so hard to watch. And I mean, it is hard to watch, but it's hard to watch for the right reasons. And I think he really takes that in his stride. He does the same with Private Ryan. He does the same with Schindler's List. He doesn't curve the edges at all. He's very much people died, and I'm going to show you that people died, because you need to see that, because that's the only way we will learn from it. And I think there's a lot of passion behind that, and I think that's what makes him the juggernaut filmmaker that he is, that he is not scared to show what he wants to show. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, and kind of off the back of that as well, you mentioned sort of Private Ryan. A lot of these films of his, he's got the status to say, I'm going to make the film this way with this violence. And not to bring up Christopher Nolan a lot recently, even Dunkirk, Warner Brothers, he wasn't allowed to have blood. He wasn't, it was a 12A, and that was one of the big things at the time, that to shy away from so much. And obviously, next week's going to be mega with what you even see in the opening scene, let alone the rest of the film. And it's really interesting with this one, because we've got some of the most powerful moments I've seen of his film so far. The boat scene, which we all know, halfway through the film, which is just grim, and at the same time, it's done in such a horrific, unique way as a viewer. And it's kind of fascinating. I just want to bring this up as well. So I couldn't find the dates this started shooting. So this came out in December 97. Jurassic Park came out in May 97. And Saving Private Ryan came out in 98. But what I'm trying to figure out, so post-production of this film happened while Saving Private Ryan was filming, and Spielberg did not look over that. He basically didn't do anything with post-production. which meant that this film, the 31-day shoot, would have been prior to June, where before Saving Private Ryan started filming. So in like a year and a bit, he's had 3 films, and one of them's a blockbuster about dinosaurs. The other one's this drama, and the third one's a war film. And it just makes me that nobody can do that now, and it just doesn't. It still doesn't happen. So directors can't do 2 films at the same time, and the closest is still Spielberg doing it. He did The Post, whilst he did. Oh my God, Ready Player One. Even this 2 films, 9/7. It's just fascinating what he's able to do, and he just works like no other director. But it's kind of not a criticism, but the fact that he doesn't have almost no involvement on the post production. I keep going back to this HBO thing in my head that it feels very TV-esque, a lot of this. And going what he said, take the shooting schedule. McConaughey on set for 28 days. I don't know how that's possible, if I'm being honest. But what surprised me is I wonder, do they have 2 filming crews? Because I can't possibly imagine that there's,
unless it was like part of his process, that he wanted to see all the scene. Because he's although he's not in every scene, his character needs to know about every scene. So, he's a bit of a artist. He's not a method at all, but he's very invested in his projects. Yeah,
he's always
and
invested,
I just wonder if this was a big change from what he was used to filming, and maybe it was part of his process was just to be like, no, I need to see it happening. I need to be there. So maybe he wasn't actually acting on all 28 days, but he might have just been there to soak it all up.
That's possible. That's believable. But no.
And if you can, why wouldn't you? If you're seeing a film like this being made, why would you not be there?
Exactly. And I think that adds to the characters within the film, if that is the case, because I'd say that a lot of these performances from the film feel like quite personal character performances. You've not got kind of separate kind of characters all kind of blending in together. Every single character in this film, I mean, they introduced them kind of very slowly and stuff like that. You get a few in there, which are introduced at the same time. But all of the main players of the film feel very separate and very kind of, you can tell apart from their personalities on set and everything like that, which is fantastic. You've got the range between Djimon Hounsou, who was basically speaking in a foreign language for, I want to say, 98% of the film. There's
Apart
one scene where he doesn't, one word or one line where he speaks in English. But his performance, it feels incredibly personal. And I know nothing about the actor's background, sadly, to say whether there was any kind of personal background thrown into the film or any personal stakes thrown in or anything like that. But it seemed like he gave so much passion into that performance and so much heart into it. It was absolutely it was encapsulating. It was absolutely encapsulating.
I think it's the biggest crime of this film was that he wasn't nominated. I think it is shocking. And if that film was made today, he would be picking up an Oscar for it, because his performance was outstanding. And like you say, to be not speaking English in an English speaking film for the entirety, basically, of his performance, just incredible. I was completely blown away by him. I think he was amazing. I think I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but I think there are maybe a couple of strands within this film that weren't needed. Anna Paquin being in it as the Princess of Spain just seemed a bit weird. Yeah. Terrible accent. She sounded Russian. I don't know why they cast her. That was a bizarre choice, in my opinion. But I kind of think maybe they were. Is there an element of whitewashing in this film? Probably. I don't know. Is that a bit too big a statement to make?
Very, very quickly, on your call for Hounsou getting the Oscar, that year, if he was up for lead actor, if we're saying that he was the lead actor of the film, he'd be up against Jack Nicholson, Matt Damon, Robert Duvall, Pete Fonda, and Dustin Hoffman.
And who won that year?
Jack Nicholson for As Good as It Gets.
Yeah. I mean, come on, his performance is better than Nicholson in As Good as It Gets.
Yeah, but even if he was up for supporting actor, he's up against one of the best supporting actor performances, sadly, of all time, with Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting.
Oh yeah, okay, fair enough. It's my
Yeah.
favorite film of all time, so that's fine. You can have that.
It was quite, dare I say, it was quite a stacked acting year, because even in the supporting actor category, you got Anthony Hopkins, who I'd say deserves a nomination based off the speech alone, and we'll talk about the speech in a bit. You've got Greg Kinnear for As Good as It Gets, Burt Reynolds for Boogie Nights, which I'd say is an underrated performance. Robert Forster for Jackie Brown as well. It's quite a stacked year on that as well. But at the same time, every single one of those actors I've just named is white. So there you go. That kind of displays it all.
And
here's a bigger twist. He
Go
got
on.
nominated for the Golden Globe for Best Actor in a Drama, which, you know, didn't win. But the fact, not to defend the Golden Globes at all, but the fact that they got it right for once, and it's not right, he didn't win, obviously, but the fact he had a nomination for the Globes and not the Oscars. By the way, this film didn't get a single BAFTA nomination as well, which is also we'll get to some of that later.
It's an incredibly American film.
It is quite an American film, to be fair.
Yeah, it's
but even Anthony Hopkins,
and I think as well with I mean, I've got the pronunciation out of Djimon Hounsou. I've grown up seeing him in supporting roles in every film, and I know he is the lead in this, and he's, you know, roles to bulk up the fact that he was more of an unknown. He hadn't had his big breakthrough yet, but he's so unbelievably good in this. And Charlie mentioned the opening scene, like, I didn't clock that was a human being at the start until the lightning struck. I thought it was like a statue or like an establishing shot. And that like performance, that tells you what's going to happen for the next couple of hours. What sort of the intensity we're going to get. And he's so good in this film. And it's kind of a shame that I don't want to speculate, because this sort of sounds horrid, but you know, when you have films of this nature, I think Captain Phillips was one where you have this sort of breakthrough actor from somebody from like an African background, and for the rest of it, they just get like lobbed in supporting performances for the rest of their career.
So,
and
I think it's really interesting for you to say that he now does supporting roles, and when this came out, he was an unknown. He's still an unknown, and I think that is an absolute crime, because if he had won the Oscar for this film, and I don't know, I think he should have got lead for it in that category, and that's a lot, because Matt Damon is my favorite actor, but I still think he deserves to have won for this. And this is kind of takes me back to what I was saying at the beginning about how different it would be if this film was made today, and you compare it to 12 Years a Slave, that completely swept the Oscars, rightly so, and that's because we are now in an age where the Academy is not as scared to nominate actors of color, and I think if this film was made within the last 10 years, he'd be an Academy Award-winning actor. And I just think that is, and again, it kind of goes back to the poster is full of all the white actors. Okay, I'm kind of eating my own words here, because Morgan Freeman obviously is on there, and I know he's not a white actor, but I just think it does go back to the whole question of whitewashing, and this is a story about slaves, yet we're kind of always talking about Anthony Hopkins and Matthew McConaughey, and I just think it's a really interesting study, because I think it's about the point where that starts to change, and maybe that's why it's not spoken about and celebrated.
I mean, you mentioned Morgan Freeman. His character's fictional in this. He wasn't one of the real life characters. And I think, like many films, they put an amalgamation of X amount of real people together. It's like, here's a fictional one, and it's Morgan Freeman. That's why I'm a bit, this film. What's really interesting?
Sorry, I keep cutting in. My brain is just thinking of stuff as we go along. But I think as well, Morgan Freeman's character has definitely got his own story to tell, and I don't think that is highlighted at all. No. He may as well have not been there, which is wrong, because he is actually the emotional weight. He's the person who's been there, been through all that, knows what these guys are all going through. And yet he's just kind of there to make up the numbers. Like, it's a bit weird.
I was going to say, his story gets very quickly relegated. I think it's like a throwaway line where he's walking through the press, and it's like, wow, that's what they're going to boil his story down to. And then he just becomes not even a supporting, literally a background character for pretty much the entire rest of the film, which is absolutely crazy. Especially, and this isn't a criticism of Spielberg or even the writers or even kind of the team that was involved with the film, but when you've got an actor like Morgan Freeman who commands the screen every single time he's on it in a film that is about kind of slavery, and there's so much going on there, you've given the character this background to the story, and then you don't follow through with any of it.
Yeah.
Especially when that character has been created just for the film in person, it's questionable. It really is. And I don't want to throw accusations out there, but it kind of makes you feel like they put Morgan Freeman in there just to kind of have Morgan Freeman in the film, and
because
not actually give him a purpose.
He's the famous black actor
exactly.
of the 90s. and it's like, it's not wrong to make those accusations, because that's exactly what used to happen. I think it probably still happens. You know, you could take out all the jargon with the Princess of Spain and the pompous British guy, and although I did kind of like that last scene where they blew up the slave place, but you know, do you know what I mean? Like, we didn't need all of that, but what we could have had is this incredible background story of Morgan Freeman's character understanding and reaching out and giving some context. But yeah, like we've just said, it just kind of got swept up. Like, yeah, there's another black guy and he was also a slave, but he's all right now, so we'll just sweep him under the carpet and leave him there. It just, I don't know, it just seemed really weird writing.
No, it's fair, and one of the criticisms this film's had is that it plays for the white savior stereotypes.
100%.
It's very, very Hollywood. We've known they've done that for decades. They still continue to do it. And I thought that was quite interesting, because it's not a criticism of Anthony Hopkins, but obviously he's playing an ex-president in this film, who is John Quincy Adams. When I was watching it, I was kind of like, why is he turn up to like a scene or two? Yeah, okay, they want a big name. Obviously, then you get to the speech at the end, and it was all hunky dory. It's like, brilliant, he saved the day. So some of the real life historical differences that didn't change the day. He didn't come in and do a speech and they all 180'd and the Supreme Court put it through. It went on. It was a long process. I get you can't do that in film. But it just felt like, you know, they were building, the whole film was built for Anthony Hopkins to walk in, do a speech, and then, you know, the Matthew McConaughey's letter to him is it's almost like, we need you to come in and save us. And I kind of understand that criticism, because I'm watching, I don't think it was as bad, but even just talking for 30 minutes with you guys so far, it's really starting to creep through. And again, you get, I mean, we get a great storyline with Joseph in it, who's the main character. We don't get to learn anything about the other slaves. And not that you need to, you know, explain all 20 different people's existence, but to only really, you know, pretty much all the scenes, they're all basically background actors. And we mentioned as well, not sort of whitewashing, but with the casting, I'm going to go back to who could have been, I don't know if anybody knows this, but the actor that turned down the role of Joseph was Cuba Gooding Jr. And I've sort of been sat here thinking, you know, Djimon Hounsou, who's got history, you know, he immigrated from Africa to France. You know, he even learnt part of the language for this. We could have had Cuba Gooding Jr., which would have been,
I mean,
so
Cuba Gooding Jr.,
American.
I was going to say, back in the 90s, Cuba Gooding Jr. was a fantastic actor. Do I think he's the correct actor for this role? No.
I'm very glad that didn't happen. And he says he regrets turning it down now.
Yeah, I bet he does.
I just saw that. I was like, that can't. I mean, and I'm not surprised, because we know he was a big name in the 90s, and you know, it's a drama, it's a Spielberg film, it's about this historical event. People will see it, and I thought that was very interesting heading into that. And you know, just some of the actors we have, and they were sort of glossed over a few of them. Because I didn't know anything about this film, of course he was in The Lost World, so we got a lot last week. But Pete Postlethwaite pops up.
Love him.
And I was so happy, and he's got this American accent. It's like, I still hear your James the Giant Peach voice coming through here.
Yeah.
Like, this is, it's like, you can say, and it's like McConaughey, like, you can be as American as you want. I can hear your accent, Matthew McConaughey.
Oh, yeah.
It's really interesting.
Talking about accents, Anthony Hopkins' Massachusetts accent. Was it his best?
It's like early American Massachusetts accent, so it still kind of sounds English.
It's odd. It was a bit jarring to me.
And there was a lot of backlash.
Hopkins, so he can do whatever he
wants.
There
was a lot of backlash when he was cast as well, apparently, because he was Welsh and playing an American president. And then Spielberg then cast Daniel Day-Lewis, an Irishman, to play Lincoln when the right time came a few years later. And I think in the 90s, that was more uncommon, whereas now I'm sure loads of British actors have played. Anthony Hopkins has played more than one president, hasn't he? Was he in Frost Nixon?
Surely.
Yeah, I'm going to check, but I'm pretty sure he has.
I mean, hasn't he played everyone?
Literally every character ever.
Any old man, it's like, oh, we'll get Anthony Hopkins to do it. He'll
I
probably
mean,
win an Oscar.
he's played Odin as well, even in a fictional Norse mythology.
Yeah.
Exactly. President
but-
of Asgard.
He's played
It's-
Alfred
I mean-
Hitchcock. Like, he's played literally everyone.
Oh yeah, he's played Hitchcock. I mean,
Yeah.
he's such a legend, isn't he? Like, even if he doesn't,
So
it's not. I
he's
don't
played-
think it's.
I was going to say, in
Go
a
ahead.
TV series documentary, he's played George Washington, William Radcliffe, John Withrop. He's played pretty much everyone.
Yeah, so he's played all of the presidents.
Yeah.
I don't blame him, and I know there's a lot of characters in this. Does anyone want to bring up any other characters? We've spoken about a handful, but a lot of them. I'm going to actually pose this to you guys. So I've not seen Lincoln. I don't know if either of you
Me
have. I think
neither.
you both
No,
probably
I've
have.
not seen Lincoln as well.
Okay,
Oh,
this is
wow,
going to rule this out.
guys.
So I know that Adam Driver's in Lincoln. This isn't me detracting to talk about Adam Driver.
Here we go.
Any excuse.
Like this film, American historical epic, similar century time frame, historical drama. And to my knowledge, I never saw it, but I knew that cast list was like every role was played by somebody that either has gone on to be big or is big. And I think Oppenheimer is going to be next year's equivalent, like historical epic. Everybody is in that film. And I feel like we had it in this, that there were sort of really minor roles, and there was really, as we mentioned Pete Postlethwaite, we haven't spoken much about Chiwetel Ejiofor, who's one of my
I
favorite
was going to
characters
chat
in
about
this.
him. Yeah, second film he did.
Incredible.
Or
and I think
he did one TV show before this, and this was his first film.
Mm.
And I thought he was fantastic in this because he's got a moral compass to being a translator, and his back and forth with McConaughey on the scene about going to the Supreme Court, I really enjoyed. The I should, and he won't tell him the word should, which I thought was one of my favorite moments. And I just got to say, it is when you've got to film this magnitude and you've got Steven Spielberg involved, that there's no surprise that the actors that are in. I mean, the fact that Skarsgård's in it, we mentioned him once. I don't know who he's playing in. I don't know American history, but I was like, you've got Stellan Skarsgård in this as well. Like everybody's in this film, and it's really interesting.
I can't remember his name, but the guy who's playing the president in the film.
Oh, Nigel Hawthorne.
Nigel Hawthorne. I mean, that's a massive name, especially for the time. Like, he's a massive actor. So yeah, they really they did the rounds. They got everyone in it, and I mean, I think Chiwetel Ejiofor is such a powerhouse. I will watch him in anything he does. And same for me, as you said, George. My favorite moment of the film wasn't the one you were talking about, but it's a moment when he's being translator whilst Cinque is on trial. And he said, and Pete Postlethwaite says to him, "You don't understand," and he just turns to him and in English and he says, "No, you don't understand." And that to me, I think, was just such a drop moment where Chiwetel Ejiofor just gets to yet again prove how incredible he is as an actor, as a performer. And yeah, I mean, that aside from obviously Anthony Hopkins' big speech at the end, that to me was one of those moments where I was really listening. Like, I really stopped and I was like, this is a story I need to really be paying attention to. And I think he has the ability to do that. He holds the screen so well.
I was going to say, for a first time proper acting role, he really did hold the screen when he was on it. And of course we gravitate to him because we know what a career he's had after this. But to have that kind of moment in the film, I completely agree with you. That was one of my favorite moments from it, where he just turns around and says, "No, you don't," and just holds them to that moment.
Yeah.
To have that as like your first big scene in any film, and for that to be in a Spielberg film as well, that's big. That's huge. That is what springboards careers.
He was only 20 as well. Sorry, I've just seen.
He hasn't changed as well. This is really funny. He genuinely just looks the same now.
Incredible.
He hasn't aged at all.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone's not got any more characters to speak about, I just want to bring up one more Spielberg thing before we talk about the score. And this is, I think, is a really, really, really noble thing, actually. So when this film was made, Spielberg had a second cut edited for this film, and he had the violence taken out so that the cut he could then show his children to sort of educate them and teach them about history, which I think is a very noble thing, because I mean, we're all not similar. We're all similar ages to each other. We'd have all studied school at the same time, and you'd do a history topic and then try and show films that your age group are allowed to watch when you're under 16 at GCSEs. And it's really fascinating that he took upon himself to educate his children, which I think is a very noble thing with this. And I think that just goes to show that he not only has a personal affection, he knows the importance of a film like this. And the story is that his kids were really bored in the courtroom scenes and didn't want to watch it, which
Yeah.
you wouldn't be surprised by if they're children,
Mm.
but you'd learn still a lot from a film like this. And I just love the fact that not many directors can do it. I don't want to do a hashtag release the Spielberg cut and all that sort of nonsense, but it's
Release
I
it
don't
to
think many
schools,
directors
maybe.
I was going to say, because
Yeah,
it's
and
under
that's
under
it.
HBO Films, so they could easily kind of release that cut and have it as like a learning resource. I know that
Yeah.
HBO Films has done that before for a lot of different things, so that wouldn't surprise me at all if they were able to do that. It's just whether that area of history is in demand or not. A lot of the time, they would focus
And how
mainly
accurate
on.
it is.
Yeah, I'd say that as well. They're focusing mainly on the Civil War when they're
Yes.
learning it in America, not about 20 years before the Civil War. They'll learn about the few years leading up to it, and then bang, the Civil War, how it started, the middle and the end. So films like this, where it's kind of just before that historical event, but still kind of has that
Yeah.
context of the historical event, get lost. I know that it's very interesting because it is a good kind of show of trial of the different kind of ideas about slavery before the Civil War actually took place. So you've got the British side where they said slavery's been outlawed. These guys are actually free. You've got the two Spanish smugglers who are saying, no, they're ours. Like, you've got the Spanish who actually want them back for theirs. And there's so many different, and the Americans who don't know what to do with them because they're kind of teetering on the edge. Half of them want them to be free, half of them don't. So it's a good kind of idea of the situation that they would have been placed in at the time of that. But at the same time, you've got the historical inaccuracies and probably just not enough people wanting to see that area of history, even though it is quite an interesting historical event. Dare I say, what would work for this would be a TV show to explain all of the events across a large amount of time. But in the end, we were given the film, and I mean, I as much as you can enjoy quite a harrowing film, I thought this film was very not entertaining, but it was watchable, and I enjoyed the filmmaking behind it. It's difficult to say that you like a film that's about the subject matter, but that's as close as I could probably get to saying that.
Yeah, I think it's really well said that because it is common for all these films, and we're not in Oscar season, but when we hit that time of year, I sort of amp up. I sort of drop off the blockbusters and go on that a little bit more, and it's really interesting doing some of these films now in the middle of blockbuster season. We're having films like Thor out, not Mission Impossible, that's next year, Top Gun, and it's like we get to do these at the same time, which is really interesting seeing. And this being 25 years old this year as well. It doesn't feel that long ago, but in terms of cinema, it's massive. And going off, we said earlier, Charlie, that we mentioned how the America wouldn't do films like this. You mentioned Cuba a while back, and that made me think like the Americans would not want to talk about Cuba not in the 70s or the 80s. And it's really interesting again where Spielberg's gonna push it and see what comes from it. And one thing I want to talk about really quickly, because I didn't find this as great as other weeks. What do you all think of John Williams' score? And listen, John Williams is the greatest composer ever lived, so I come here every week to say it's fine, because I'm doing all of them. So the ones that stand out are the mega ones. I didn't really notice the score until the courtroom scenes, and I was kind of relieved because I was really struggling at the latter courtroom scenes to pay attention because I just wasn't. I'm not gonna lie, I'm like his children. I was just a bit bored on the courtroom stuff. I enjoyed the pre-Supreme Court where they were there and it had a bit of intensity. But for the Supreme Court one, I was just very, again, it built up to this big Anthony Hopkins entrance moment to do the speech and save the day. I'd phased out of it, but the Spielberg score in that bit I remember being particularly great.
Yeah, that's the only scene that I can actually remember the score being present or really kind of impactful at any point. Although I'm just trying to recall over the film now, the opening scenes, I remember there being some of the score thrown in there and kind of being not caught off by it, but I do remember it kind of at least having a presence within the scenes at the start where they're overtaking the ship. But for the rest of the film, I don't want to say it was terrible, but it was just unnoticeable. It just blended in. I don't know whether that was because it is that kind of courtroom drama thing and the music does blend in the background, but there was no big sweeping scores that took you off your feet. And I'll be honest, I don't think this is the kind of film that needed that. This film would have done better making use of more kind of levels of silence in certain scenes and everything like that, instead of having a score in the background to try and kind of like aid the scene, because I feel like the silence would have been a bit more impactful. Which means saying, yes, we need less John Williams in this film. But like for this film, I'd say that would actually work, especially because we didn't really notice the score anyway. So, this maybe could have been one where John Williams didn't have to, actually, work on this one. He could have gone off and added to his collection. Was it 5 composers that he worked with outside of Williams, or the
Just
few...
5 films Williams hasn't done.
The lucky list of 5. This could have easily been one of those 5, and I wouldn't have even noticed. Genuinely.
Yeah. I mean, I think I did know it was a John Williams score, because when you watch those John Williams concerts on TV, there's always an Amistad section, and everyone's always like, "What's Amistad?" I haven't seen that film. I've never heard of that film, but I was aware going in that it was a Williams score. But I'm the same as you guys. Like there was music, maybe, I don't know, was there? I wouldn't have noticed it. But the whole not using silence as a tool is such a trait of the 90s. Everything had to have a great big booming soundtrack over it. It's just very of its time, everything about it. I think that's probably the best way to sum it up.
No, that's really well said. And just talking about the impact, the legacy of this film, we'll go over, as we always do, the box office. Not that box office matters for dramas like this, but it's still 58 million box office worldwide off a 36 million budget, and it is very much worth mentioning. This came out a few weeks after Titanic, which was the biggest film in history. Yeah, exactly. So it did well to even. I'm going to be honest. It did well to even get that number. That is not. That is just, I think there was a few other films. I can't remember which ones. There's a few other big films that came out around the time of Titanic, and they all completely bombed. But this one's done okay. And jumping into the Oscars, it got 4 nominations, as we spoke about earlier. Supporting for Anthony Hopkins, Best Cinematography, Best Costume, and it got a Best Score nomination. Which is, listen, John Williams. Is he on like 60 now? He's the most nominated person in Oscar history after Walt Disney, which is just incredible. That's just incredible that, for one, he can only have 1 nomination to score. He can't get producer credits as well, which is just always fascinated me. And, maybe, as we said, we're all British. Maybe to the Americans that score might have meant more, or the ending of the film and that kind of stuff, because that's the interesting dynamic, isn't it? Is how the American audiences respond to films like this. I think I know how they was, certainly at the time. And it is sort of interesting. And just jumping into sort of how is it perceived today, I'm just going to be blunt. I've never heard anybody until today speak to me about Amistad. Again, is that a British thing? I don't know, because I don't even get it on film Twitter. And normally, you'll always see once in a while a Spielberg thread, like, here's some underrated films, XYZ. You never, ever, ever have this brought up. And as we kind of said it, for the cast of this film, it's not that everybody's done better, because that's really unfair. But the cast for this film would make you think that this is, an ensemble classic or an esteemed classic. I'm not saying it's not esteemed; it's clearly successful in its own right. But it's just, when we get to the top 10 Spielberg list, I don't think this will be in anyone's top 10s.
It might sneak into mine. It might sneak into mine, to be honest. I did enjoy this film. I enjoyed the experience, and I like courtroom dramas, and I love those kind of Oscar-y films. So I did actually quite enjoy this film, especially some of the filmmaking in this film. One shot that sticks in my head from the opening scene, at least, is where he's turning the boat and the camera angle is looking up, and you see the stars shifting around. That kind of filming, especially from those kind of the big scenes that are in this film, are fantastic. And I've always been a sucker for a courtroom drama. I always have been. So this one might sneak in. It'll either be 10 or 11 when it comes down to it at the end. But I want to
34.
Yeah, possibly. I really enjoy. You don't realize I do quite like this film. He does have a lot of very good films. So it will have to come down to me listing things out and seeing where it stands. But there's a chance that it'll sneak in. If we look at what it was up against, because it was nominated for 4 Oscars. We've already spoken about the acting categories and stuff like that. So we've got Sir Anthony Hopkins going in for Best Supporting Actor for literally his speech, literally for one speech. I don't know if that's ever been done before in any other film.
Oh, yeah, Judi Dench, Shakespeare in Love.
Yeah.
What is she, 3.5 minutes on screen, and she won the Oscar?
Yeah.
We get to speak about that film next week. That's going to be fun.
Oh, yeah. Oh my God. I completely forgot that whole drama. Yeah. Biggest robbery in Oscar history, I reckon there. But this year, what this film was up against, because it didn't get nominated for Best Picture. Even after getting 4 nominations, it didn't get nominated. It was up against Titanic, which obviously won, As Good as It Gets, which has a fantastic cast, a good film. Good Will Hunting, which is kind of
one of the best films ever made.
Fantastic. LA Confidential, which I really like as well. And The Full Monty, which I was really shocked that it got this many nominations.
Great film.
Full Monty also got in on directing over this film, which I find incredible.
No, that's right. That's definitely right.
But it's the one there. It's like one of these is not like the other when you look at that list of 5 films. And The Full Monty getting nominated for Best Picture over this film, I think is fascinating.
Amazing.
But yeah, it's really interesting because it got 4 nominations. It didn't win any of them. That year at the Oscars, other films that actually won awards, I just want to scroll down because I saw one. Here we go. Men in Black. Didn't even realize Men in Black won an Oscar for Best Makeup.
Visual effects?
Makeup?
Yeah.
Makeup?
Oh, there are aliens, though. No, it's got, what's his name? Vincent D'Onofrio's cockroach.
Oh,
thing,
yeah. Oh, what a legend.
That's
a great film.
Yeah, everything else was pretty much won by Titanic, As Good as It Gets, or The Full Monty, which once again I didn't realize picked up an award for Best Original Musical or Comedy Score, which used to be a category in there.
I saw that for the first time last year. It was when we were doing Bond because I was watching loads of like Brosnan. You know what? When we got to a Bond, watching like the what's the word? Like the Bond cast other films.
Yeah.
And I'd never seen Full Monty. I remember watching it. That's so much fun. Not to do a Full Monty review now, but I was like, I didn't realize. I know that film was big financially. You know, it's this massive event. I never realized the accolades it had until last year. I was like, oh my god, like this was a storm. And I wonder if that's like what not America thought of England, but that kind of, you know, they have this and this, you know, they will drink tea, they're this and that. I wonder if they think like, oh, Sheffield is genuinely like the Full Monty now. And that's a very fascinating
just like
one.
it.
And we're getting a sequel series, aren't we? They're all coming back.
I believe so, yes.
Makes sense with the current cost of living crisis. That'd actually be really contextually well done if they have to start stripping again.
True.
What, Mark Addy's stripping for the cost of living crisis? Absolutely.
I'm here for it.
Oh, it's just, you know, that's amazing. It's right. And I'll say this not to sort of diss Amistad because it's 2 completely different films. I'd much rather Full Monty had that nomination than this.
Yeah.
Just because that feels like an achievement of look at what you've done.
Yeah.
Whereas this, you know, again, it's easier to look here 25 years later. Amistad, I just think would have gone completely under the radar again with Titanic. And I think the other films, you know, Full Monty would have been here's the box office one that's done all this stuff in England. Titanic is the juggernaut, and then the others slot in quite nicely. And it does make it very interesting for this because the fact it's still got 4 nominations, it's still turned a profit. And I've kind of been quite harsh on it, which I don't mean to. But if anyone wants to bring up any notable scenes, we spoke about the opening scene. We spoke about what would you call it? It's like not the origin because it sounds ridiculous, but the backstory.
I'd say the kind of how they got into the Amistad and everything to do with
that. Yeah.
Probably the most traumatizing few moments of the film is the rocks. And I think what does it's a credit to the direction in a horrifically positive way. When it just cuts to the empty ocean after, that is harrowing. Because we know exactly what that is, what has happened.
Yeah.
And it's almost playing the image that we know how big the ocean is. But you never know how many thousands and thousands of millions of people that could have happened to in that era, in that time. And it's really powerful, just that few seconds of just, you know, the shimmering ocean. And yeah, it's quite tough, but I just wanted to bring that moment up in particular because there's obviously horror what you're watching before. And, you know, it's just knowing, again, it's credit to Spielberg, isn't it? He's willing to show what other people would back out. He won't.
No, that scene itself was just, it hit me, that scene with kind of the open ocean afterwards, especially. And I want to say that Spielberg would have wanted that scene placed in there. and filmed in that way only after he did Schindler's List, because he had that phenomenal kind of like harrowing experience with that film and showing the absolute horrors of that. So that, dare I say, he was able to do that with exactly the same this film and contextualize it for people who had seen his previous film as well, to suddenly go, oh, so that this isn't just a one-off event in history. There has always been mass killings of certain people of certain races and stuff like that. That scene, it does stay with you throughout the film. For me, that opening scene as well, the lighting in the opening scene and just kind of the breakout of it was fantastic. We already said about Chiwetel Ejiofor's kind of moment in the courtroom. We've already spoken about Sir Anthony Hopkins' kind of speech in the courtroom. I also want to give it out there to the give us free moment, the give us free, and kind of that declaration to the court. It's a good moment. Some might say it's cheesy. I quite liked it within the context of the film. That was another moment where the music kind of came in and kicked in. But sometimes in those courtroom dramas, and especially this one, you need that kind of moment because it has been so depressing up until that point. If the film does have a good ending, which it did to some extent, like the slaves, they were freed. They were allowed to go free. To have this kind of moment as kind of the almost turning point of the trial, that's a good moment as well, from at least my perspective.
Yeah, and the same with the scene with the rocks on the ship. There was a moment where a mother and her newborn baby fell backwards. Well, didn't fall backwards, jumped backwards off the ship. And I think that to me was a very like, I mean, all of it is harrowing and heartbreaking and difficult to watch. But that to me was like, she knew that even her taking her child with her was a better option. And I think that, and there was no dialogue. It was just a look that she gave to Tayte in that moment. And that to me, I think that will stick with me. But all of it, well, not all of it. Some of it I think could have been cut. Some of it I think was unnecessary. But I would have really liked just a real choppy, like in between this is the story that happened on the boat and this is the story in the courtroom. Don't think it needed all the extra fluffing. But I'm with Tayte. I really enjoyed this film. I would watch this film again, and I'm going to tell people to watch this film. But I do think it's interesting that I don't know anyone else that's seen it, and everybody that I have said that I was watching it to has said, "Oh, I really want to see that." And it's like, yeah, me too. Like, but why haven't we? You know. So yeah, I'm gonna say, go find it. It's on Netflix. Watch it. It's worth watching just for the quality of the acting and the quality of the filmmaking.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I've been a bit harsh on that, and I don't think I like it as much as you both. But it's very important, and I think there is a place for important films that there is the argument. Well, it's not an argument; it's the fact they should be seen as well. And yes, a film isn't everything. You can have, historical elements gone wrong. But if some people want to watch films and they're caught up and not reading, watching, it can have to do sometimes. And I think for this it is important viewing and where it sort of sits with American history, because I'm just going to be blunt. In the UK, we don't learn about the slave trade. I know in this they paint the British Empire with a lovely painting that these guys were the guys against slavery. They might have been in 18 whenever they might have been when this was set, but they weren't before. And I think it's that kind of it's good they show that because we know the reality of it. And it goes back to that message, like what are they taught in schools, what do they not know? And I think even about getting political, Prince Charles has even hinted recently that he wants it to be compulsory when his time comes in education. And it kind of goes to us, we're not Americans, but we do little bits of American history when we're at school, and it is really interesting to see who would know about this. Because as you both said earlier, everyone speaks of the Civil War. No one really speaks about America pre the Civil War. They all speak about the Civil War and onwards. So it's a really interesting conversation in that way. And obviously, even with Spielberg himself, Lincoln is towards the end of the series. That's 2012. And that's very, very similar in terms of a timeline compared to obviously his more modern film. So that's going to be interesting seeing how he approaches a historical epic sort of 15 years later and seeing, how the world has moved on in production, etc., etc. But, I do still think it's a good film. And I think one of the reasons I've been a bit not harsh on it because I've sort of seen recently The Color Purple, Empire of the Sun, Schindler's List. I've seen those dramas that he's been moving on to, and I don't think for me this has worked as well as them, but it's still very good. But it's just a struggle for me to look at them. Obviously, Schindler's List being the prime example of anything. To follow that up and still do this is pretty. That's not he mentally struggled after Schindler's List and doing Amistad and Saving Private Ryan back to back.
Yeah.
That's the mentality to get through any of that is crazy. But if I'm giving my overall thoughts, absolutely watch this. If you haven't seen it, do give this a watch, and I do think it's important, especially as I said earlier, for the performances. To see some of the actors that might have the credibility they should now, and see some actors you might like when they're a lot younger and stuff. So it is interesting from that dynamic, and I think that's going to wrap up the review for Amistad. So we want to hear from you in the comments. If you have seen this film, have I been too harsh on it? Do you have any similar thoughts? Any disagreeing thoughts? Do let us know. Obviously, this one's about for 25 years, so just comment your thoughts on the film, your history with it. Maybe you've not seen it and you want to see it. It'd be really curious if you do get a chance to do it across the series with us, because there's a lot of films we're seeing for the first time, and there's nothing wrong if you haven't seen all of these films too. So please do comment your thoughts. And if you're a fan of Steven Spielberg, hit the subscribe button. I do not need to remind you what is coming up next week. I've hinted at a lot today. Saving Private Ryan is coming Tuesday, the 2nd of August. To me, one of the greatest films ever made, and one of my favorite films of all time. And before we get into the socials, I'm just going to quickly bring up the calendar. So we've mentioned a lot of Saving Private Ryan, but what comes after Saving Private Ryan? Well, we've got AI, artificial intelligence, we've got Minority Report, and Catch Me If You Can has finally made it to the board. So we're heading into the 21st century, albeit slowly. But it's going to be really exciting doing some of those. And Tayte, I know we're going to miss you for another couple of weeks, but we will have you on for some more still. I still feel bad for the ones you had to miss when you were away last time.
It's okay. It's fine. I am still getting through the series. I think I've only missed one Spielberg film so far, which I will try and go back and watch, which is Always. The one which, I'll be honest, it's the only one which I'm dreading watching because of how bad I've heard about it. But
it's got Audrey Hepburn in, so it's worth watching.
Okay.
Queen Audrey.
Yeah, sure. I'll give it a watch. But no, I will be keeping up with the series at least, and I will be back on, fingers crossed, for one of those in the near future. In fact, this run, I am looking forward to this run. I absolutely love AI. Minority Report's a fantastic film, and also Catch Me If You Can is, in my eyes, an absolute classic. So it's a good run coming up, at least for me. But if you want to watch any of those videos, what you should do is you should go and follow us on our various different social feeds to keep up to date with when the videos are going out. So follow us on Twitter and Instagram at cinema_savvy. Go onto Letterboxd and Facebook, just type in Cinema Savvy, and go into the link in the description. Click on the link to Redbubble and help support our channel by picking up some merch today.
Definitely. So everybody, please do that. And Charlie, we have her on the channel a lot. So if you don't already follow Charlie, please follow her on her Twitter account, Funny Old World X. What can people find out from you on your Twitter? You tweet a lot about Morbius and other things to sell it nicely.
I do tweet quite a lot about Morbius. Thanks for noticing. Well, anything really about the films I'm watching at the moment. I'm writing my dissertation for my master's, and I'm watching a lot of films about AIDS. So come over for some cheery chat about films about AIDS. That's the weirdest plug I've ever done.
It's fine. It's fine. It does work for it. And you've been on our channel a lot. We always appreciate you taking time out to join us. So everybody, please do follow Charlie on there. And that is going to do it for this video today. So once again, thank you to everybody watching at home for taking time out to see this video today. We hope you've enjoyed it. We hope you like Amistad. We hope you've seen Amistad. And we all probably have seen Saving Private Ryan. So do join us next week. I cannot wait for that. And we'll see you then.